That winter, New York was buried beneath the heaviest snowfall the city had seen in a decade. I was sitting in a narrow bar in Brooklyn, a half-finished glass of bourbon resting in front of me. Under the dim amber lights, the liquor glowed like liquid gold. My friend Martin leaned against the counter, his own glass already empty. He stared out at the snow swirling beyond the window for a long moment before suddenly asking me a question. "Do you know why some people seem to have everything going for them?" he said, "yet somehow manage to turn every relationship into a disaster?" I set my glass down and nodded for him to continue. Martin was a psychologist with a modest practice in Manhattan. Over the years, he had met countless people drowning in heartbreak, trapped in cycles of love and loss they couldn't seem to escape. That night, he told me a story one about a patient of his. When he finished, I sat in silence for a long time, because the story felt less like a story and more like a mirror. And in that mirror, I saw far too much of myself. The patient's name was Lena. Martin first met her on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She arrived wearing a perfectly tailored beige trench coat. Her makeup was flawless, her posture impeccable. She spoke calmly, with just enough humor to make her seem approachable. She told him she worked as an editor for a publishing company. She had a respectable career, a comfortable income, a stable circle of friends, and spent her weekends attending yoga classes. Whenever she described her life, she sounded as though she were reading from the brochure of a luxury product. Every detail was polished, every sentence carefully arranged, everything appeared perfectly in order. "I want to know why I keep failing in relationships," she said. She sat on the sofa with her knees together and her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her posture was so flawless that she looked less like someone seeking help and more like someone attending a job interview. Then she smiled. It was a faint smile, the kind that flickers across the surface of water before disappearing. Practiced, controlled, the smile of someone who knew exactly when social situations required her to curve her lips upward. "The men I choose always have problems." On the surface, the statement sounded confident, but Martin heard something else underneath. Like a coin with two sides, one side blamed the world, the other revealed a person who had spent so many years sitting in the seat of judgment that she had forgotten how to truly embrace another human being. Over the following weeks, Lena slowly unfolded the story of her life. What fascinated Martin was the way she talked about her past. She never seemed to remember it. She recited it, as if she were retelling a book she had read hundreds of times. Every chapter had been analyzed, dissected, and revisited until the memories themselves had hardened into certainty. And whenever the conversation drifted toward the deepest wounds, she would instinctively wrap her emotions in broad, intellectual language. It was as though she covered every scar with beautiful wallpaper. Lena's mother was a gifted concert pianist, but her devotion to excellence exceeded her capacity for love. In Lena's childhood, approval from her mother was a scarce resource like water in a desert. To earn even a single drop, you had to travel farther and work harder than seemed humanly possible. Lena began taking piano lessons at 7, not because she loved music, because her mother believed that elegant girls should play piano. For 12 years, she practiced 2 hours every day without fail, rain or shine. She convinced herself that if she became good enough, eventually she would earn praise. When she was 12, she performed a Chopin piece in a school talent competition and won second place. Proudly clutching her certificate, she ran to her mother. Her mother glanced at it once and asked, "What piece did the girl who came in first play?" That was all. The tone wasn't harsh. If anything, it was gentle, like someone asking a simple factual question. But somehow that gentleness made it worse. The words slipped into Lena like a needle, sinking quietly into bone. Years later, she described the feeling to Martin. "It was like I spent all my energy building a bridge to reach my mother," she said. "I got all the way to the last plank, and just when I thought I'd made it, she turned around and walked away without even looking back." She paused, then added in a voice so calm it sounded almost detached, "I eventually realized something. In her eyes, second place was failure, and I was the failure." Her father occupied a different role in her life. He was what Martin called an elegant absence, a senior executive at a multinational corporation. He spent 2/3 of every year traveling for work. During the remaining third, he sat silently in the living room reading newspapers, like an isolated island surrounded by invisible water. You could walk around him, you could exist beside him, but you could never truly reach him. Lena remembered her 14th birthday. Her father had promised he would come home for dinner. She waited all evening. The candles burned down. The frosting on the cake began to collapse. At 11 o'clock, the phone rang. A meeting had run late, he explained. He apologized. He promised to make it up to her next time. Next time never came. Lena didn't cry. By then, she had already learned that crying was a form of weakness, and weakness was not allowed in her family. So she quietly cleared the table, placed the cake in the refrigerator, and returned to her room to finish her homework. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, she realized something that would follow her into adulthood. Her parents had never truly seen her. Her mother saw a project that needed improvement, a masterpiece forever unfinished. Her father saw a shadow, in the living room, something that could always be attended to later. But the real little girl inside her, the one who longed to be held, who whispered wishes into her pillow late at night, had never entered either of their field of vision. The cruelest thing about emotional neglect isn't simply the absence of love, it's the absence itself, a hole that can never quite be filled. No matter how much you throw into it, everything disappears into darkness without even an echo. The insecurity it creates is like a chronic illness. Most of the time, it lies dormant in the bloodstream unnoticed. But the moment intimacy appears, it awakens like a virus and begins to spread, until it consumes everything. Lena fell in love for the first time during her freshman year of college. His name was Evan. He studied architecture and had eyes that curved into crescents whenever he smiled. They met in the library. One afternoon, Evan slid a note across the table. On it was a sketch of a cat. Beside the drawing, he had written, "You look exactly like this cat when you read. Very focused. Also like you might fall asleep at any second." Lena laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite smile she had mastered for other people. Not the smile she wore because she was supposed to. For the first time in a very long while, she laughed simply because something was funny. The first few months were among the brightest periods of her life. Evan would go out of his way to buy her favorite blueberry muffins. When she stayed up late working on papers, he would sit beside her quietly sketching designs. Whenever sadness descended on her without warning, he would pull her outside to the athletic field, point at the clouds, and say, "Doesn't that one look like a hippopotamus that just tripped over itself?" Lena believed she was happy. The feeling wrapped around her like a brand new coat with the tag still attached. She wore it carefully, treasuring it, protecting it, yet never fully trusting it, because she had never known how long warmth was allowed to last. But beneath Lena's polished exterior lived something far more fragile, an old collection of fears, insecurities, and wounds she had carried since childhood. And those hidden fractures began to seep into the relationship in ways that were almost obsessive. It started with Evan's phone, or rather, with the way Lena's eyes would instinctively drift toward the screen every time it lit up. The truth was, she didn't distrust Evan. She distrusted her own worthiness of being loved. That distrust lived inside her, like a seed buried deep beneath the surface of consciousness. Given the slightest opportunity, it sprouted. When Evan said he had to work late, she wondered if her company had become boring. When he casually mentioned a female co-worker, she wondered if the woman was prettier, smarter, more interesting than she was. When 30 minutes passed without a reply to a text, Lena's mind would already have produced an entire movie. Evan falling in love with someone else, leaving her behind, and her sitting alone in an empty apartment with nothing but silence for company. Eventually, she began checking his phone. Not openly, not by asking, "Can I see your phone?" Instead, she waited until he was in the shower and quietly unlocked it with his fingerprint. She searched his messages, his call history, his social media accounts. Like a seasoned detective, she hunted for evidence of betrayal hidden inside every word, every punctuation mark, every seemingly innocent interaction. The ironic part was that she never found anything. Nothing. Evan's phone was as clean as freshly polished glass. And somehow that made her even more anxious. Because Lena had long ago convinced herself that nothing in this world was truly clean. Every spotless surface concealed dirt underneath, just as her own elegant exterior concealed a landscape of ruins. So she began creating conflict. If Evan forgot to say goodnight, she might withdraw for an entire day. If he spent a little too long talking to a female friend, she could erupt late at night over something seemingly insignificant. And after a bitter argument, she would sometimes stare at him coldly and say, "You should just leave. Everyone leaves eventually." She demanded proof of love with desperate intensity. Yet at the same time, she instinctively pushed away the people who genuinely tried to love her, like someone dying of thirst in the desert who, when offered a bottle of water, doesn't reach for it. Instead, she asks, "What if it's poison?" Evan endured it for 2 years. Over those 2 years, the boy whose eyes crinkled when he smiled gradually became someone cautious and exhausted, someone who moved through the relationship as though walking across thin ice. He stopped meeting female friends one-on-one. He stopped mentioning female co-workers altogether. His average response time to her messages dropped from 10 minutes to 30 seconds. He changed his phone password to her birthday. Once, he even canceled a long-planned birthday gathering with friends because Lena was having a bad day. None of it helped, because the problem had never been what Evan did or failed to do. The problem lived much deeper. Inside Lena was a little girl who had never truly been loved enough. A little girl sitting alone in the corner of her childhood, holding an empty bowl. Waiting for someone to place inside it a little affection, a little attention, a little proof that she mattered. But there was a hole in the bottom of that bowl. No matter how much patience, tenderness, or devotion Evan poured into it, everything drained away during the next night of fear and emotional collapse. The day they broke up was an ordinary Wednesday. Evan sat in their apartment with takeout containers spread across the table. Kung Pao chicken for Lena, beef noodles for himself. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look sad. He looked tired. The kind of tiredness that seems to seep from the bones themselves. The kind that says, without words, "I can't do this anymore." "Lena," he said quietly, "I love you, but I don't know how to love you." She looked up. His eyes were steady, filled with resignation rather than blame. "Your love feels like a black hole," he continued. "I keep throwing myself into it, trying to reach the bottom. But there is no bottom." Lena said nothing. She stared into his eyes and saw something she recognized immediately. Emptiness. The hollow look people carry when they have finally exhausted every part of themselves. She had seen that look many times before, most often in her own reflection. And for the first time, she realized what she had done. She had turned Evan into another version of herself. After he left, she sat alone in the apartment all night. She didn't cry. She never cried. She pushed every emotion down into her bones until it felt as though they might crack under the pressure. The next morning, she got up as usual. She showered, applied her makeup, went to work. She smiled at colleagues in the elevator, presented an idea during a meeting that earned praise from her manager. No one noticed anything different. Later, there were 2 more relationships. Both ended the same way. A passionate beginning, a brief period of happiness, then the endless suspicion, the testing, the demands for reassurance, and finally, another exhausted partner walking away. By the end of each relationship, the words sounded remarkably similar. "You're too heavy. I always feel like I'm not enough. Being with you feels like taking an exam I can never pass." After the 3rd breakup, Lena finally walked into Martin's office. "Martin told me it took a long time before she understood one crucial truth. The problem wasn't that she kept choosing the wrong men. The problem was that she was looking for love while carrying a massive emotional void inside her. She was like someone dying of thirst in the desert. Every time she spotted an oasis, she threw herself toward it with desperate force, clinging to it until every drop of water was gone. Then she searched for the next one, and the men who left her often left wounded as well. Years of suspicion, testing, and emotional demands had gradually eroded their sense of self-worth. People who grow up starved for love often don't mean to hurt others. Yet in their desperate search for affection, they sometimes pull another person into the abyss with them. "So did she ever get better?" I asked. Outside, snow continued to fall. The streetlights reflected off the white ground, creating a pale glow that felt strangely unreal. Martin was silent for so long that I thought he might never answer. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know." He stared out the window. Emotional deprivation isn't something a relationship can fix. It isn't healed by finding the right person or having a sudden realization. He paused. It's a wall someone spends an entire childhood and adolescence building, brick by brick. Tearing it down requires the same amount of time, the same patience, and a kind of courage that has to come from within. He smiled faintly. The process is slow, repetitive, like trying to dig through a mountain with a spoon. Some people quit after a few years. Some spend a lifetime digging. Lena is still digging. Then he added, "But at least she started." Most people don't even realize there's a mountain standing in front of them. I looked down at the bourbon in my glass, now completely cold, and suddenly I thought about my own relationships. The arguments that seemed to come from nowhere. The endless question, do you really love me? The bottomless insecurity that no amount of reassurance ever seemed able to fill. I remembered nights spent staring at my phone, 30 minutes without a reply, and my imagination would immediately construct the worst possible ending. How many people in our generation grew up starved for affection? And how many of us carried those empty spaces into our relationships, turning love into a battlefield where two people slowly drained the life from each other? Perhaps the cruelest thing about entering a relationship while carrying emotional deprivation is this. It isn't that these people don't want to love, it's that no one ever taught them how. They mistake love for proof, for testing, for endless reassurance, for a trial in which the other person must continually demonstrate their devotion in exchange for temporary peace. They are so terrified of abandonment that they try to force every possible outcome into the open before it can surprise them, as if known pain might somehow be easier than uncertainty. What they don't realize is that love is rarely about passing tests. Most of the time, love is something quieter, a kind of trust. Two imperfect people sitting beside the river of life, each carrying their own wounds, saying very little, yet somehow understanding everything. People who grew up starved for love are not bad people. They are wounded people. They are the children who stood waiting for too long, hoped for too long, and were disappointed too many times. Their love is real. Their longing is real. But the drought inside them often runs so deep that it can swallow every piece of warmth that tries to reach it. And the truth is, every human being has limited emotional energy. Every person deserves to be loved fully, healthily, and without being drained in the process. So when it comes to choosing a partner, be careful about choosing someone whose wounds are still consuming them. Not because they deserve judgment, not because they belong in some category of damaged or unworthy, but because loving someone who is still trying to fill an endless emotional void can feel like running a marathon with no finish line. It requires extraordinary reserves of patience, extraordinary emotional resilience, extraordinary self-awareness, and a heart strong enough not to collapse beneath another person's fears. You may find yourself holding them together when you're falling apart yourself, understanding them at the exact moment you most need to be understood. And most people, if we're honest, are simply ordinary human beings carrying wounds of their own, hoping to be treated with kindness. Choosing a partner is, in many ways, choosing an emotional ecosystem. A healthy relationship is not two people trying to fill each other's holes. It's two relatively whole people walking side by side, each carrying their own light. Because if the ground beneath one person's feet is constantly collapsing, eventually anyone reaching out to save them risks being pulled into the collapse as well. That night, when I stepped out of the bar, the snow had stopped. A thick blanket of light covered the streets. The city was so quiet it felt as though someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. I pulled my coat tighter and walked through the snow. Each step produced a soft crunch beneath my boots. The cold air filled my lungs and, strangely enough, made everything feel clearer. Then I remembered the last thing Martin had said. Love isn't rescue. His voice echoed in my memory. No one is meant to be someone else's lifeboat. He paused before adding, eventually, every one of us has to learn how to swim on our own. I stood in the middle of the empty street and looked back once at the warm yellow glow spilling from the bar's windows. Then I turned away and walked into the stillness of the white night. A few snowflakes began drifting down again. They landed softly on my shoulders, light as a sigh. At its core, choosing a partner means choosing an emotional environment in which you'll spend your life. People who grew up deprived of love do not lack the desire to love. If anything, they often crave it more desperately than anyone else. The problem is that the void carved out by childhood wounds cannot be filled by love from the outside. That void behaves like an emotional black hole. Anyone who comes too close is gradually pulled toward it. The patience you offer, the understanding you give, the tenderness you pour in, all of it can slowly disappear into endless cycles of anxiety, testing, and reassurance seeking. People who are emotionally deprived are often not looking for love itself. They are looking for proof that they matter, proof that they are worthy, proof that you won't leave. And the tragedy is that no amount of proof is ever enough. Because the problem was never whether their partner loved them enough. The problem lives in the wound itself. Over time, you may discover that you've changed. You entered the relationship as a whole person. carrying your own dreams, energy, and light. Yet little by little, you become a candle that burns itself down trying to keep someone else warm, until eventually there is nothing left to burn. Healthy intimacy looks different. It is not one person constantly transfusing life into another. It is two people walking beside each other, each carrying their own light, each making room for the other's shadows. You are not a lifeboat, and no one should be asked to become yours. Learning how to swim on our own is one of the most important lessons we must master before we ask another person to share the ocean with us.